So in this video, we will have a look at Immanuel Kant's take on freedom and duty by considering the categorical imperative in his groundwork for the metaphysics of morals. Thus, it will be a kind of introduction to Kant's moral philosophy too, which is exciting because Kant's moral philosophy is an interesting one, but being Kant's moral philosophy, there's also quite a lot to unpack. So first, it's important to set the scene a little when we talk about Kant's moral philosophy. And this importance of contextualization lies in the fact that Kant started a new current in philosophy, which is called transcendental philosophy, and which we have to keep in mind for his moral philosophy in the following all the time. So what's that transcendental philosophy? Roughly speaking, Kant tried to fill the gap with transcendental philosophy between two other currents of his time, which were speculative rationalism and British empiricism. While on the one hand, speculative rationalism elaborated on concepts like the immortality of the soul without verifying it by sense perception or experience, British empiricism, on the other hand, would only hold those things for true that can be verified and perceived in experience and sense perception. So what does Kant's transcendental philosophy contribute in this conflict? Basically, Kant sees valid points in both positions. He thinks we have to face questions like those about the immortality of the soul, while he is also convinced that experience and sense perception have to support the concepts of the sciences. So what he does now is to take a step back by saying, well, first, let's look what our reason can actually know at all. As a result, and in short, transcendental philosophy elaborates on the preconditions of our reason that are necessary so that we can have experiences at all. This approach is called from the Latin a priori, meaning from the first. So what has to be in experiences first before all experiences for experiences to be possible? While our actual single experiences would be the a posteriori, meaning from the latter, because our latter a posteriori experiences are possible thanks to the former a priori preconditions. To clarify this, let me give you a quick example before we go to moral philosophy. According to Kant, we have a priori categories of thought in our reason, like causality. We have to think causally, and only because of that we can perceive and experience things in the world causally, or we have to perceive in space and time, so we cannot help but perceive causally and in space and time. For example, you cannot say, well, today I will not think causally and I will not perceive things in space and time. That's just impossible. And why is that impossible? Because it is a precondition of your reason. So you cannot get out of it or rid of it, even if you make up some great sci-fi thought that tackles the concepts of space and time or causality. You can only reject those categories because you have them already a priori in your reason. As a consequence, though, that we have categories that kind of filter and precondition what we can actually know, we never experience the world as such, because we do not know how the world was before it got through the filters of our categories. And that, what we never experience, but that has to be there somehow, is Kant's famous thing in itself, das Ding an sich, which is a whole discussion on its own and fills the libraries, like actually everything concerning Kant fills the libraries, so that would be something for another video, I guess. Now, what does all this talk of transcendental philosophy has to do with moral philosophy, you might ask? Well, Kant's thought is that there must be an a priori precondition on the moral level too. So he's looking for something in our reason that enables us to judge morally. And this something in our reason, for Kant, has to give a universal standard for judging something as good or as bad. And because it is a universal standard, it means that we cannot judge as we wish, or that there are no good or bad actions as such. There are good and bad actions, and there are universally, but not because of something outside of us, something good or bad in the world, but because of something universally inside of us that makes us to judge something as good or bad. So, in our reason, for Kant, is a certain measure or standard, which A enables us to judge morally at all, and thus also enables morality, and B, against which every actual a posteriori action is measured. And this universal standard is, you might have guessed it, Kant's categorical imperative. So let's see how Kant develops this categorical imperative and tries to prove it, because he can't just claim it, he has to prove it in a certain way, and let's see what it exactly says. So the starting point from which Kant tries to derive the categorical imperative is our goodwill. Kant claims that only our goodwill is what is in the world entirely and absolutely good. Hence, for Kant, there must be some rule in the goodwill that makes the good good and the bad bad. By the way, this focus on the will and thus intention is called deontological ethics, meaning the intentions of your actions matter and not the outcome of your actions. Whereas on the other hand, teleological ethics, or another name for it, consequentialism, claims that only the outcome matters and not your intentions. The intentions are secondary or not important at all. But back to Kant. So, if only the good will is good, Kant argues, we have to investigate the principle of the will. And this pure principle for Kant of the good will is lawfulness, the concept of a binding rule as such. Now, what does that mean? What is pure lawfulness? For Kant, the structure of pure lawfulness is that I ought never to act except in such a way that I could also will that my maxim should become a universal law. Now that is the categorical imperative which imposes the duty on us to follow it. But what does that mean? What is maxim and so forth? Well, let's imagine, for example, you help somebody on the street to lift a heavy box. Now, the categorical imperative is not about lifting boxes, but about the maxim that is in this action while you help somebody lift a heavy box. And this maxim, which is the principle of your action, would be in this scenario to help others. And when we wonder now, could this maxim of helping others become a universal law? We would answer yes, sure. So this action would be morally good, but only if the categorical imperative and its duty imposed on us was the motivation. So let's see what I mean by that and dig a little deeper. First, even if the categorical imperative imposes the duty on us to follow it, this does not mean, of course, that we cannot deviate from it. That's why, for Kant, there are three ways of interacting in our everyday actions with the categorical imperative and the duty it imposes on us. First, there are actions out of duty. Second, there are actions in accordance with duty. And third, there are actions, of course, contrary to duty. However, for Kant, only one, the action out of duty, represents a morally good action. Now, what exactly does out of duty mean in comparison with accordance to duty, and what is the difference? Out of duty means that it's just the duty that motivates and guides the action. Or put differently, there can be no emotions, no inclinations involved, but just the duty as the driving force. So as soon as we act out of emotions, the action is no longer morally good for Kant, no matter if the emotion may conform with duty and however amiable it may be. Take our example of helping this guy with the heavy box. If we helped out of pity or compassion, according to Kant, this action would not be morally good. It would have been only a good action if we did it out of the insight in the categorical imperative and out of the duty to follow it. And for that consequence, that actions out of emotions and also good and amiable emotions, those actions are not morally good. Many people say have their reservations about Kant's moral philosophy and had them and still have them. It's an ongoing topic. But for us now, instead of judging or rejecting it directly, let's ask first why emotions, no matter how amiable they are, prohibit an action from being morally good. Why is that? And the answer refers back to transcendental philosophy, which is why I started this video on this note. For Kant, even amiable emotions hold actions back from being morally good, because in transcendental philosophy, emotions don't give a universal law for morality. They are important, but you can't extract, say, a rule out of the emotion love or compassion. Everybody feels different and has different love levels or compassion levels with different people. So it's very unique and very hard to make a certain rule and firm benchmark one has to measure it against. And for Kant, this is incompatible with transcendental philosophy and transcendental morality that searches for a universal, clear standard that enables morality as such. And this can only be found in reason for Kant. So finally, let's talk about freedom in this context. So far, we covered that the categorical imperative imposes its duty on us. Now for Kant, because it is your very own duty that obliges you, it means that the influencing part and the influenced part are the same. So the duty and the following of it is purely internally motivated, which means that following the duty of the categorical imperative is freedom and autonomy, meaning self-determination. Inclinations or emotions, however, are external factors for Kant. You can't really control them or have an insight in them. You could also say emotions influence you, while with your reason you influence yourself. Thus, for Kant, following emotions is not only not morally, but also not an act of freedom, which is also a tough pill to swallow and a topic of ongoing discussion. So I'm afraid I have to leave it at this maybe heated point. There is a lot more to discuss and say about Kant, let alone about freedom, because it is not that easy as I have portrayed it. Freedom is a difficult one with Kant. But depending on you guys, I might make other videos about this topic, and if you're interested in moral philosophy and moral philosophy is your thing, check out my video on Aristotle. It might be interesting for you. So I hope this video was useful, and despite the density, still kind of enjoyable. If you want to see more like this, please like, subscribe and comment what you think about Kant, and yeah, see you in the next one.